The galaxy had learned to fear one thing above all else: a desperate human with nothing left to lose. In the sprawling crystal spires of Nixthara Prime, where alien nobility floated through chambers of liquid starlight and breathed atmospheres that would kill most species in seconds, this truth echoed through marble corridors like a whispered prayer. The hegemony, that vast confederation of 12 advanced species that had carved up the known universe, had discovered humanity barely 3 decades ago. What followed was not first contact. It was conquest. But conquest, as the hegemony learned, was only the beginning of their problems. The human homeworld now bore a different name in the official records: Compliance Zone 7 Alpha. Earth was a memory. Terra was forbidden speech, and those who had survived the orbital bombardment that brought humanity to its knees now served in 1,000 different capacities across the galaxy: laborers, technicians, soldiers, and sometimes bodyguard. Commander James Rourke stood motionless in the shadows of Lady Valtyrie's private chambers, his scarred hands resting on the plasma rifle that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. 6 feet of lean muscle wrapped in tactical armor, with steel-gray eyes that had seen too much and forgotten too little. The uniform he wore bore no insignia of his homeworld. Such displays were punishable by neural reconditioning. But every line of his posture screamed military. Human military, the kind of bearing that couldn't be trained out, only suppressed. The chamber around him was a testament to excess that would have fed entire human colonies for decades. Walls of living crystal pulsed with bioluminescent art that shifted and danced according to the occupant's mood. Gravity fields maintained pools of liquid mercury that defied physics, creating impossible waterfalls that flowed upward into dimensions that hurt to look at directly. And scattered throughout this alien paradise, displayed on pedestals of pure energy, lay treasures that could buy star systems. Valtyrie herself was beauty incarnated in a form that human minds could barely process. 8 feet tall, with skin that resembled polished obsidian shot through with veins of gold. She moved through her chambers like liquid grace given form. 4 arms that could break steel moved with the delicacy of a surgeon, while her 3 eyes, 2 where a human's would be, one centered in her forehead, tracked everything with the calculating precision of a predator. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that could induce euphoria in most species. She was also, Rourke knew, one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. "My faithful guardian," Valtyrie's voice drifted across the chamber like silk wrapped around a blade. "You've been watching those artifacts quite intently." Rourke's expression didn't change, couldn't change. 3 years of service to the hegemony elite had taught him that survival meant becoming a statue when they spoke. "I'm watching for threats, my lady." As always, a sound like wind chimes laughing. "Threats?" "In my private chambers. On Nixthara Prime, behind 7 layers of orbital defense." Her central eye focused on him with laser intensity. "Tell me, James Rourke of the extinct human fleet, what threats could possibly reach us here?" The question hung in the recycled air like a trap waiting to spring. Rourke had learned to read the subtle signs. The way her secondary arms stilled, the barely perceptible shift in the crystal wall's luminescence, the way the impossible waterfalls seemed to flow just a fraction slower. She was testing him. Again, it had been like this for months now. Little tests, probes, questions that seemed innocent but carried enough political voltage to execute a dozen species. And always, her treasures were left out in the open. Weapons that could level mount currency chips worth more than humanity's entire GDP before the conquest. Information crystals containing state secrets that could topple governments. All of it sitting there, unguarded, tempting. "The greatest threats," Rourke said carefully, "are often the ones we create for ourselves, my lady." Valtyrie's laugh was like music played on instruments made of starlight and shadow. She approached one of the display pedestals, a weapon of some kind, all curves and deadly elegance, floating in a containment field that bent light around it. Her primary hands traced the air around it, never quite touching. Wisdom from a human. The mockery in her voice was gentle, almost affectionate. "Your species has always fascinated me, James. So primitive, yet so persistent. Like insects that refuse to die even when their nest is burning." Rourke said nothing. Experience had taught him when silence was the only safe response. "Do you know what this is?" She gestured to the weapon floating before her. "No, my lady. A neural disruptor. One of a kind crafted by the Synthesis Collective, before they disappeared. Whoever wields it can rewrite the mind of any sentient being within a light-year radius. Memories, loyalties, entire personalities, all malleable as clay in the hands of whoever holds this." Her three eyes fixed on him. "It's worth more than your entire species was valued at during the acquisition." The word acquisition struck Rourke like a physical blow. That was what they called it in the official records. Not conquest, not genocide, acquisition, as if humanity had been a corporate purchase rather than a civilization burned to ash and rebuilt in chains. "Quite something, isn't it?" Valteri continued, her tone conversational. "Of course, the safety protocols are quite complex. Takes nearly an hour to properly activate. And the command sequences—" She paused, her central eye studying his face. "Well, they're currently stored in an unsecured data crystal sitting right there on my desk." Rourke's gaze flicked to where she indicated. There, among a dozen other seemingly random objects, sat a data crystal, no larger than his thumb, glowing softly, unprotected. "My lady," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "perhaps such items should be secured." "Should they?" She moved closer, and Rourke caught her scent. Ozone and exotic flowers with an undertone of something that made his hindbrain scream danger. "I trust my faithful guardian implicitly. After all, loyalty is the one virtue your species seems to possess in abundance, even when everything else has been acquired." She was close enough now that he could see his reflection in her obsidian skin, close enough to strike, close enough to grab that data crystal and activate the neural disruptor before she could react, close enough to rewrite the mind of one of the hegemony's most powerful figures and perhaps, just perhaps, begin to balance the scales for what they had done to humanity. The thought whispered through his mind like poison honey. Sweet, tempting, utterly suicidal. Because this was the test, had always been the test. Valteri wasn't careless. She was calculating. Every treasure left unguarded, every weapon displayed like art, every moment of apparent vulnerability was part of an elaborate examination. She was studying him, learning him, waiting to see what a desperate human would do when presented with power. And Rourke was desperate, more desperate than she could possibly imagine. Hidden beneath his armor, pressed against his ribs like a second heartbeat, lay a datapad containing the locations of 17 human refugee camps scattered across the hegemony territories. Camps that officially didn't exist. Children who had survived the orbital bombardment. Elderly who remembered Earth's actual name. Scientists, artists, philosophers. The scattered remnants of human culture, hidden away and praying to gods that might no longer listen. Valteri had given him that information 3 months ago. A gift, she'd called it. So you know they're safe. But the implication was clear, their safety depended on his continued loyalty. One wrong move, one moment of human pride or desperation, and 17 camps would burn, just like Earth had burned. "You're thinking quite loudly, my faithful guardian," Valteri said softly. "Your species has such expressive faces. Every emotion, every doubt, every desperate calculation plays across your features like a symphony." She reached out with one of her secondary hands and traced a finger along his cheek. Her touch was warm, almost comforting, and carried the faint tingle of bioelectric current. "Tell me," she whispered, "what are you thinking about?" The honest answer would have been escape. Revenge. The weight of 17 refugee camps balanced against the possibility of striking back at the species that had murdered his world. But honesty was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not with so many lives hanging in the balance. "I'm thinking about duty, my lady, about the oath I swore to protect you." Her finger trailed down to rest against his throat, where his pulse hammered against his skin. "Duty. Yes, your species is quite obsessed with that concept, isn't it? Duty to country, duty to family, duty to abstract principles that exist nowhere in the physical universe." Her central eye dilated slightly, and Rourke realized she was reading his biorhythms. Heart rate, respiration, micro-expressions. His entire physiological response was being analyzed in real time. But what happens, she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, when duty conflicts with survival? When loyalty means watching everything you love burn? When the very act of keeping your oath ensures that your species remains acquired? The neural disruptor pulsed behind her, casting strange shadows across the chamber. The data crystal on her desk seemed to glow brighter, as if responding to the tension in the room. This was it. The moment she'd been building toward for months. The test that would determine not just his fate but the fate of 17 refugee camps scattered across the galaxy. Children who still remembered lullabies sung in languages the hegemony had tried to erase. Adults who carried the weight of human history in their hearts. Rourke could feel the weight of choice settling on his shoulders like lead armor. Grab the crystal. Activate the weapon. Rewrite the mind of a hegemony noble and perhaps create a crack in their perfect system of control. Or remain loyal to his oath and watch as humanity slowly withered away in hidden camps, sustained only by the mercy of their conquerors. Either choice meant damnation. Either choice meant betrayal. "I think," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest, "that sometimes the greatest act of defiance is refusing to play the game." Velthari's three eyes blinked in perfect synchronization. For a moment something like surprise flickered across her features. "Interesting," she murmured. "Most interesting indeed." She stepped back, her hand falling away from his throat. The sudden absence of her touch felt like a physical cold. Around them, the chamber seemed to hold its breath. Even the impossible waterfalls had gone silent. "You know," she said, conversationally, "there's something I haven't told you about those refugee camps." Rourke's blood turned to ice. "My lady? They're not real." The words hit him like a plasma blast to the chest. "Oh, the locations are accurate enough. But they're not refugee camps. My dear Guardian, they're training facilities." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Training facilities. Velthari moved to her desk, her movements now predator-quick and precise. She picked up the data crystal, not the one containing the neural disruptor commands, but another one he hadn't noticed. This one pulsed with a different light. Angrier. More urgent. "We've been training humans, you see, teaching them to fight more efficiently, more ruthlessly, turning them into the perfect soldiers for the hegemony's expansion into the Outer Rim territories." Her smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. "Your people's remarkable capacity for violence, channeled and directed by superior intelligence. It's quite beautiful, really." Rourke's hand moved toward his weapon before he could stop himself. The gesture was futile. Velthari was faster, stronger, and equipped with personal shields that could stop a battleship's guns, but his body reacted on instinct. She laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. "There's that human fire. I was wondering when I'd see it. You know how long I've been waiting for you to show me what you really are beneath all that dutiful submission?" "You're lying," he said, though even as the words left his mouth he knew she wasn't. The pattern was too perfect, too precisely designed to break him. "Those are refugee camps. Children and elderly, not soldiers." "Children and elderly can be quite useful too," she said with casual cruelty. "Children learn quickly. Elderly remember things. Both make excellent leverage when properly motivated." The data crystal in her hand pulsed brighter, and suddenly the chamber's walls came alive with holographic displays. Images flooded his vision, humans in combat gear, moving with military precision through training exercises. Children no older than 12 learning to strip plasma rifles. Elderly men and women teaching tactics and strategy to younger generations. Not refugees, not survivors. Weapons. The hegemony doesn't waste resources, James. Your species is too useful to simply imprison, too dangerous to allow freedom. But properly directed, she gestured to the images surrounding them, you'll help us conquer species that have resisted us for millennia. Human creativity and desperation, guided by our wisdom and technology. Rourke watched in horror as the holographs showed human soldiers, his people attacking worlds he didn't recognize. Alien cities burning under weapons that bore human fingerprints. But hegemony design. His species transformed into the instruments of the same empire that had destroyed their world. "This is why the test was necessary," Velthari continued, her tone now businesslike. I needed to know what kind of human you were, whether you could be trusted with the truth, whether you would break under the weight of it. The neural disruptor still floated in its containment field. The command crystal still sat unguarded on her desk. But now Rourke understood the full scope of the trap. Even if he grabbed the weapon, even if he managed to rewrite her mind, it wouldn't matter. The system was too large, too entrenched. Thousands of humans were already integrated into the hegemony war machine. There was no rescue, no escape, no glorious rebellion, only the choice between slavery and complicity. So, Veltari said, settling into a chair that molded itself to her alien form, what will it be, my faithful guardian? Will you maintain your oath of loyalty, knowing what you now know, or will you finally show me what a desperate human truly looks like? Before Rourke could answer, alarms began screaming throughout the complex. Red emergency lighting bathed the chamber in the color of blood, and the impossible waterfalls suddenly froze in midair. Velthari's 3 eyes went wide. That's impossible. The orbital defenses. The chamber shook as something massive impacted the structure above them. Then again, and again. Through the crystal walls, Rourke could see streaks of light crossing the alien sky. Ships, hundreds of them. Moving in formation patterns he recognized from his academy days back when humanity still had an academy, back when they'd had hope. Human ships. Attacking Nixthara Prime. Velthari rose from her chair, her 4 arms moving in complex patterns as she activated emergency protocols. This is impossible. Your species doesn't have the technology, the resources, the coordination. No, Rourke said quietly, understanding flooding through him like sunrise after the longest night. We don't. His hand moved to the hidden datapad pressed against his ribs. The locations of 17 training facilities. Facilities full of humans who had been taught to fight by the best military minds in the galaxy. Humans who had been given hegemony weapons and tactics and technology. Humans who had been underestimated. You taught us, he continued, his voice growing stronger. You gave us your weapons, your strategies, your weaknesses. You thought you could control us, aim us at your enemies like guided missiles. He smiled, and for the first time in 3 years it was a genuinely human expression, fierce, dangerous, and utterly uncompromising. But you forgot something important about desperate humans. Veltari's central eye fixed on him with laser intensity. What? The chamber shook again as more ships entered the atmosphere. Through the crystal walls, Rourke could see hegemony defense craft rising to meet them, only to be swept aside by coordinated human tactics and superior numbers. We lie, he said simply. We deceive. We pretend to be broken when we're just gathering strength, and when we're desperate enough. Another impact, closer this time. We'll burn down the galaxy itself rather than submit. Lady Veltari, noble of the hegemony and architect of humanity's enslavement, stared at her faithful guardian as her perfect world began to crumble around them. And for the first time in her impossibly long life, she felt something she'd never experienced before. Fear. The attack had lasted 6 hours and 17 minutes. When the last hegemony defense platform fell silent, the crystalline spires of Nixthara Prime lay shattered like broken dreams across an alien landscape that burned with the phosphorus fire of human revenge. But victory, Lady Veltari discovered as she stood in the ruins of her private chambers, was not always what it appeared to be. Commander James Rourke had not moved from his position during the entire battle, even as the walls exploded around them, even as debris rained down from the collapsing ceiling, even as human soldiers breached the complex and began systematically executing every hegemony official they could find. He'd remained at his post, protecting her, his oath intact. It was, she realized, the most perfectly human thing he could have done. They'll be here soon, she said, her voice carrying none of its usual harmonic manipulation. Around them, emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows. The impossible waterfalls had evaporated, leaving only twisted metal and broken dreams. Your people. My death squad. Rourke nodded, his plasma rifle still held at ready position despite the fact that they both knew he was the only thing standing between her and a very unpleasant end. Yes, my lady. You could have killed me yourself. During the confusion. Made it look like collateral damage. She turned to face him, her three eyes studying his scarred features. "Why didn't you?" The question hung between them like a live wire. In the distance, they could hear weapons fire as the last pockets of hegemony resistance were eliminated. Screams in languages that most humans couldn't pronounce, but which Rourke had learned to understand during his 3 years of service. "Because," he said finally, "this was never about killing you." Before she could ask what he meant, the chamber's main entrance dissolved under controlled plasma fire. Through the smoke and debris strode a figure that made Veltharaz's enhanced physiology freeze with recognition and terror. General Catherine Hayes had been dead for 37 years. Veltari knew this because she'd personally overseen the execution, watched as the woman who'd led humanity's final desperate stand on Earth was reduced to atomic particles by hegemony disintegrators. Yet here she stood, older but unmistakably alive, flanked by soldiers wearing armor that bore impossible fusion of human engineering and hegemony technology. "Hello," Veltari Hayes said, her voice carrying the weight of nearly 4 decades of carefully orchestrated revenge. "Did you miss me?" The hegemony noble's mind raced through possibilities, calculations, desperate attempts to understand how this could be happening. Death was final, irreversible. The hegemony had sciences that could extend life, transfer consciousness, even rebuild bodies from genetic templates. But true resurrection was impossible, wasn't it? "You're dead," Valtteri whispered. "I watched you die." Hayes smiled, and the expression carried enough menace to crack diamond. "You watched a me die. One of me. The me that was stupid enough to think she could fight your entire armada with what remained of Earth's fleet." She stepped closer, her boots crunching on crystal debris. "But the me that matters, the me that learned, the me that planned, I've been very much alive." Rourke's weapon remained trained on the approaching soldiers, but his stance had subtly shifted. Still protective, but now protecting both his charges from each other. "Impossible," Valtteri said. "Consciousness transfer requires quantum entanglement matrices, neural pathway mapping. Technology or species didn't possess." "Didn't possess then?" Hayes interrupted. "Amazing what you can accomplish when you're highly motivated and have access to captured hegemony technology. Even more amazing what you can accomplish when you're willing to sacrifice everything, including your original body, for the chance at revenge." The truth hit Veltari like a physical blow. During the conquest of Earth, several hegemony research vessels had been destroyed in the fighting. Ships containing experimental consciousness transfer technology, ships that had crashed on Earth's surface with their data cores intact. "You found the wreckage," she breathed. "You downloaded yourself before the execution." 17 times, Hayes confirmed. 17 separate consciousness transfers, each one hidden in a different location across your territories. Insurance policies, you might call them. When one body died, another activated. Her smile grew wider, more predatory. "Did you really think humans would go quietly into extinction without preparing contingencies?" Velthari's gaze flicked to Rourke, who stood motionless between them. "And him? Your faithful guardian? Has been mine since the day he arrived at your service," Hayes replied. "Did you think we'd leave our best commander in the hands of our enemies without proper preparation? Every report he sent you, every display of loyalty, every moment of devoted service, all of it carefully calculated to keep you complacent while we prepared." The scope of the deception was breathtaking. 3 years of perfect servitude. 3 years of apparently genuine loyalty. 3 years of watching Velthari grow confident in her control over her pet human while secretly feeding information back to a resistance she'd thought extinct. "The refugee camps?" Velthari said suddenly. "The training facilities. You knew I would eventually tell him." "We were counting on it," Hayes confirmed. "We needed you to reveal the full scope of the hegemony's human exploitation program. Needed exact locations, guard rotations, defensive capabilities. Information we could never have gathered through conventional espionage." Her eyes glittered with cold satisfaction. "Your arrogance made you predictable. Velthari, you couldn't resist showing off how thoroughly you'd broken us." Velthari felt something she'd never experienced in her impossibly long life. The sensation of being outmaneuvered by an inferior species. The careful psychological manipulation she'd used on Rourke. The tests, the temptations, the gradual revelation of terrible truths. All of it had been part of a larger game she hadn't even known she was playing. The neural disruptor, she said suddenly. The command sequences, if he'd taken them, he would have found that the weapon had been sabotaged months ago, Hayes said pleasantly. Really, did you think we'd leave a device capable of rewriting minds in the hands of our greatest enemy? We've been in and out of your private chambers dozens of times. Your security is quite impressive, but human ingenuity has a way of finding solutions. The chamber shook again as more human ships settled into the complex's landing bays. Through the broken crystal walls, Veltari could see soldiers moving with perfect coordination, their actions guided by intelligence gathered over 3 years of apparent servitude. So what now? She asked. Public execution. Revenge for the billions you lost? Hayes considered the question with the air of someone who'd had nearly 4 decades to think about the answer. Execution would be wasteful. You're far too valuable to simply kill. Valuable? You're the architect of the human exploitation program. You understand hegemony psychology, politics, military capabilities better than any other captured official. You've spent 3 years studying human nature, learning our strengths and weaknesses. Hayes gestured to the ruined chamber around them. We're going to put that knowledge to good use. Veltari's 3 eyes widened, as understanding dawned. You want me to work for you? I want you to help us dismantle the hegemony from within. Your people respect you, trust your judgment. With the right motivation, you could be instrumental in preventing this from becoming a war of mutual extinction. And if I refuse? Hayes nodded to one of her soldiers, who stepped forward carrying a device that made Veltari's enhanced physiology recoil in instinctive terror. A neural crown, hegemony technology, but modified with human engineering, cruder than the original but infinitely more brutal in its application. Then we'll extract every piece of useful information from your mind and leave what's left as a warning to other hegemony officials, Hayes said matter-of-factly. Your choice, cooperation or vivisection. But Veltari was studying Rourke's face, reading the micro-expressions she'd learned to interpret during their 3 years together. Something was wrong. Despite his perfect military bearing, despite the apparent success of the human attack, there was tension in his features, concern, even guilt. There's something you're not telling me, she said to Hayes. Both of you. Rourke's grip on his weapon tightened almost imperceptibly. Hayes's smile faltered for just a moment, barely a fraction of a second, but enough for someone with Veltari's enhanced perception to catch. The training facilities, Veltari continued, her analytical mind cutting through the emotional chaos to focus on the patterns beneath. 17 locations. 17 separate human military units, all equipped with hegemony technology and trained in our tactics. That's not just enough for a rescue operation. That's enough for a full-scale invasion. Hayes said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. You're not here to rescue your people, Veltari breathed. You're here to use them. Those children in the facilities, you're not liberating them, you're recruiting them. Turning them into soldiers for your war against the hegemony. The children were already soldiers, Hayes replied coldly. Your people made sure of that when you burned their homeworld and scattered their families across the galaxy. I'm simply giving them the chance to fight back. By turning them into the same kind of weapons the hegemony created, by giving them the tools they need to survive in a galaxy that wants them extinct. The facade was cracking now. Esa's carefully controlled demeanor was giving way to something rawer, more human, more desperate. How many? Veltari asked quietly. How many human lives are you willing to spend to bring down the hegemony? All of them, if necessary, Hayes said without hesitation. Every last human in the galaxy, if that's what it takes to ensure our species survives. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Veltari looked at Rourke, saw the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of that terrible arithmetic. He'd known, had known all along what Hayes was planning. That's why you couldn't kill me, Veltari said to him. Not because of your oath. Because you know she's wrong. You know this path leads to the same place as the hegemony's human extinction through transformation into something monstrous. Before Rourke could respond, alarms began screaming again throughout the complex. But these weren't the local alarms they'd heard during the attack. These were system-wide emergency signals, the kind used when entire star systems were under threat. Hayes activated a communication device built into her armor. Report. General, we're reading massive hyperspace distortions throughout the system. It's the Hegemony Third Fleet. They're jumping in from the Outer Rim territories. Hayes's face went pale. That's impossible. The Third Fleet is engaged with the Synthesis Collective Rebellion. It would take them weeks to disengage and reach us. Ma'am, you need to see this. A holographic display materialized in the ruined chamber, showing space around Dusthera Prime filled with the geometric impossibility of hegemony warships. Thousands of them. Far more than the Third Fleet could account for. But as Valtteri studied the display, she noticed something that made her enhanced physiology flood with chemicals that translated roughly to hope and terror in equal measure. Those aren't all hegemony ships, she said quietly. Look at the formation patterns. The energy signatures. That's a coalition fleet. Hayes leaned closer to the display, her military training automatically cataloging what she saw. Synthesis collective vessels. Void Dancer cruisers. Even some of the old Empire remnants. Her voice carried a note of dawning horror. They're working together. Valtteri nodded. Pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. Your attack on Nixtura Prime wasn't just revenge, General. It was a declaration of war against the entire hegemony. And the other species, the ones who've been fighting us for centuries, they see an opportunity to destroy the hegemony while we're fighting each other, Hayes finished. To destroy everyone while we're fighting each other, Valtteri corrected. The Synthesis Collective doesn't distinguish between different kinds of biological life. The Void Dancers see all matter-based civilizations as obstacles to their transcendence. The old empire wants to reclaim territories that belong to all of us now. The holographic display updated, showing weapons platforms throughout the system powering up, ships taking positions for orbital bombardment. A fleet capable of sterilizing not just Nixthara Prime but every inhabited world in the system. They're going to glass everything, Wark said quietly. Humans, hegemony doesn't matter. They want us all dead. Hayes stared at the display with the expression of someone watching their carefully laid plans crumble into ash. 40 years of preparation, 3 years of perfect espionage, the sacrifice of her original body and the transformation of human refugees into soldiers. All of it rendered meaningless by the arrival of enemies who saw no difference between oppressor and oppressed. Time to impact? She asked. 18 minutes until the leading edge of the fleet reaches effective bombardment range. 18 minutes to prevent the extinction of 2 civilizations. 18 minutes to undo 40 years of hatred and revenge. 18 minutes to prove that sometimes the greatest act of defiance is choosing to save your enemy. Valtteri looked at Hayes, saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. The same terrible arithmetic that had driven her to plan this assault. How many lives could be sacrificed to preserve the greater whole? There is another option, Valtteri said quietly. Hayes turned to face her. I'm listening. The system's primary defense grid is controlled from this complex. With the right access codes and properly coordinated tactics, it might be possible to hold off the coalition fleet long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Whose reinforcements? Both of ours, Valtteri said. Hegemony and human. Working together. Your people have our technology now. Our people have the numbers and established infrastructure. Separately, we're both extinct within the hour. Together, she gestured to the display where thousands of enemy ships moved in perfect formation toward their mutual destruction. Together, we might survive long enough to see tomorrow. Hayes studied her for a long moment. And after tomorrow, assuming we live through this? What then? Partnership, alliance. You go back to enslaving my people. I don't know, Valtteri answered honestly. But I know that none of us get to find out if we're all dead in 18 minutes. The chamber fell silent except for the distant sound of weapons fire and the hum of approaching engines. 2 civilizations, 2 species that had been locked in a cycle of conquest and revenge, facing extinction at the hands of enemies who saw them both as equally expendable. Rourke stepped forward, his weapon finally lowering. General, he said to Hayes, she's right. Whatever else happens, we deal with this threat first. Hayes looked at him, her most trusted operative, her perfect infiltrator, the man who'd spent 3 years pretending to serve their greatest enemy. Your recommendation, Commander. Rourke glanced at Valtari, then back at his commanding officer. I recommend we save the moral philosophy for after we've prevented mutual extinction, ma'am. Hayes closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, she was no longer looking at Lady Valtari as an enemy to be destroyed or a resource to be exploited. She was looking at her as what she'd never expected her to be. An ally. 17 minutes, she said. Show us what we need to do. As alarms continued to scream and enemy fleets moved into bombardment position, three figures who should have been trying to kill each other instead began working together to prevent the end of everything they'd ever known. And in that moment, humanity and the hegemony discovered something neither of them had expected. Sometimes the galaxy's greatest threats come not from your enemies, but from those who see no difference between you and your enemies at all. The planetary defense grid of Nixthara Prime had been designed to withstand the concentrated firepower of entire starfleets. What it had never been designed for was the coordinated assault of 5 different species, each wielding weapons that violated the fundamental laws of physics in their own unique and terrifying ways. Lady Valtari's 4 hands moved across the control interface with desperate precision, her enhanced physiology pushed to its absolute limits. As she rerouted power, realigned targeting systems and coordinated defensive fire patterns that should have required a staff of hundreds. Around her, the system's primary command center had been transformed into a war room where human tactical doctrine merged with hegemony technology in ways that neither species had thought possible. Synthesis collective ships are dropping reality anchors around the outer planets, General Hayes reported from her position at the tactical display. 40 years of military experience had taught her to read battlefield dynamics instantly. But what she was seeing now defied every strategic model she'd ever studied. They're trying to lock down hyperspace, prevent reinforcements from jumping in. Void dancers are worse, Commander Rourke added, his scarred hands flying across a human-modified hegemony sensor array. 3 years of studying alien technology was paying dividends now as he tracked energy signatures that registered on no conventional instruments. They're not just blocking hyperspace, they're unmaking it, reducing dimensional barriers to their base mathematical components. Valtari spared a fraction of her attention from the defensive grid to process what they were telling her. The synthesis collective's reality anchors could be overcome with enough raw power. The Void Dancer's dimensional unweaving was infinitely more dangerous. A weapon that attacked the fabric of space-time itself. How long until they complete the isolation field? She asked. 14 minutes, Rourke replied. After that, we're cut off. No reinforcements, no escape, no rescue. Around them, the command center shook as the first wave of bombardment struck the planet's outer defensive shells. Energy screens that could stop supernovae flickered and strained under the concentrated firepower of species that had been perfecting warfare for millennia. Hayes studied the tactical display with the cold calculation of someone who'd spent 4 decades planning for exactly this kind of impossible scenario. Current defensive efficiency, holding at 67%, Valtari reported. But the old Empire ships are using temporal displacement weapons, striking us in the past to weaken our present defenses. I can compensate, but it's resource-intensive. And the hegemony reinforcements? Valtari's central eye focused on a communication array that showed empty space where their rescue fleet should have been. Admiral Kethavar's task force is still 3 hours out. The Coalition picked their timing perfectly, caught us at the moment of maximum vulnerability. The chamber shook again, more violently this time. Through the crystalline walls, they could see the alien sky filled with streaks of impossible light as weapons that shouldn't exist tore through defensive systems that had protected Nixthara Prime for centuries. "Ma'am," Rourke said, his voice carrying a note of carefully controlled desperation, "I'm reading massive energy buildup from the Coalition fleet. They're preparing for synchronized bombardment, every ship firing simultaneously at different temporal coordinates." Valtari's 3 eyes widened as the implications hit her. Temporal cascade bombardment. They're not just trying to destroy us in the present, they're attacking every moment this planet has ever existed simultaneously. Can the defenses handle that? Hayes asked. No, Valtari said simply. Nothing can. When those weapons fire, Nixthara Prime will be erased from the timeline. It will never have existed. The tactical display updated, showing Coalition ships moving into final position. Energy readings that made no sense according to any known physics. Weapons that could murder history itself. Hayes stared at the display for a long moment, her mind running through calculations that all led to the same inevitable conclusion. Then she activated her communication array. All human units, this is General Hayes. Emergency Protocol 7 is now in effect. All personnel are to implement final contingency measures immediately. Rourke's head snapped up from his instruments. General, you can't mean— I mean exactly what I said, Commander. Hayes's voice carried the weight of command that had held humanity together through the darkest moments of their conquest. The mission parameters have changed. Our survival is no longer the primary objective. Valtheri didn't understand the specifics of human military protocols, but she could read the biometric data from both officers. Elevated stress hormones, resignation, the physiological markers of beings preparing to die. What is Protocol 7? She asked. Hayes and Rourke exchanged a look that carried the weight of shared knowledge and mutual respect earned through years of impossible service. Mutually assured preservation, Hayes said quietly. When facing extinction-level threats that endanger multiple species, human forces are authorized to implement any and all measures necessary to ensure the survival of allied civilizations, regardless of cost to humanity itself. The words hit Valthari like a physical blow. You're planning to sacrifice your entire fleet to save us. Not just the fleet, Hayes corrected. Every human in this system, every refugee, every soldier, every child we came here to rescue. All of it. The tactical display updated again, showing human ships throughout the system changing course, moving into positions that would intercept coalition bombardment, not with weapons but with their own hulls, turning themselves into shields to protect hegemony worlds. This is madness, Valtheri said. Your species has already suffered too much. I won't be party to your extinction. Then you'd better think of a way to save us all, Hayes replied grimly. Because in approximately 11 minutes, those coalition ships are going to fire, and when they do, every human in this system is going to be standing between their weapons and your people. Valtheri turned back to the defensive grid controls, her enhanced mind racing through possibilities that all seemed to lead to the same place: mutual annihilation or human sacrifice. Neither option was acceptable. But as she studied the energy patterns of the approaching bombardment, an idea began to form. Terrible in its implications, impossible in its requirements, but mathematically sound in ways that made her enhanced physiology flood with chemicals that translated roughly to hope and terror. The temporal cascade weapons, she said suddenly. They attack multiple time streams simultaneously, correct? Correct, Rourke confirmed from his sensor station. Then they require massive computational power to coordinate the temporal mathematics, processing capability that would strain even synthesis collective resources. Hayes glanced up from her tactical display. Your point? What if we gave them more calculations than they could handle? Overloaded their targeting computers with temporal paradoxes. How? Valthari's hands moved across the control interface, calling up schematics that she'd hoped never to use. The planet's core contains a temporal stabilizer, technology left over from the old Empire's original colonization efforts. It's what keeps Nixtera Prime's timeline coherent despite all the reality-warping technology on the surface. And if we destabilize it, the planet becomes a temporal anomaly. Every moment of its existence begins happening simultaneously. Past, present, and future collapse into a single mathematical impossibility that no targeting computer could process. Hayes stared at her. That would make the planet uninhabitable. Temporally paradoxical. Everyone on the surface would be trapped in a loop of causality. Everyone on the surface would be alive, Valthari corrected. Trapped, but alive. And the coalition fleet would be unable to target something that exists in all timelines simultaneously. The chamber shook again as another wave of bombardment struck the outer defenses. Through the crystalline walls, they could see the alien sky beginning to crack, reality itself straining under the assault of weapons that attacked the fundamental nature of existence. Time to coalition bombardment? Hayes asked. 8 minutes. 17 seconds. Rourke reported. Hayes closed her eyes, running through the terrible mathematics of sacrifice and survival, save her people by letting an enemy world die, or save both by trapping everyone in a temporal paradox that might preserve their lives but would certainly end their civilizations. There's another option, Rourke said quietly. Both women turned to look at him. The neural disruptor. The real one, not the sabotaged version you mentioned earlier. He was looking at Velthari. You still have it. I can see it in the storage alcove behind the main display. Velthari's 3 eyes blinked in surprise. She'd forgotten about the weapon in the chaos of battle, but Rourke was right. It was still there, still functional, still capable of rewriting the minds of any sentient beings within a light-year radius. You want to use it on the Coalition fleet, she said. I want to use it on everyone, Rourke replied. Humans, hegemony, Coalition forces, everyone in the system. Rewrite their minds so they remember a different history, one where this war never happened, where the conquest of Earth never occurred, where all our species learned to coexist before it came to mutual destruction. The scope of what he was suggesting was breathtaking. Billions of minds, rewritten simultaneously. Entire civilizations given false memories of peace instead of the reality of war. It would work. The neural disruptor had the power and range to affect every sentient being in the system, but it would also be the ultimate violation. The complete erasure of everything they'd all fought for, suffered for, died for, their actual history, replaced with comfortable lies. The Coalition ships are moving into final position, Hayes reported. 6 minutes to cascade bombardment. Velthari stared at the neural disruptor, then at the temporal stabilizer controls, then at the tactical display showing human ships preparing to die for a species that had enslaved them. 3 options. All impossible. All requiring sacrifices that no being should have to make. There is a 4th choice, she said quietly. Hayes and Rourke both turned to look at her. We fight. All of us. Together with everything we have. Human tactics and hegemony technology and the desperate fury of species that refuse to go extinct. She gestured to the defensive grid displays. It probably won't work. The odds are mathematically negligible. But if it does work, we all survive, Hayes finished. Human and hegemony, with our actual memories intact. No temporal loops, no mental reprogramming, no sacrificial martyrdom. Just the slim possibility that we're better together than any of us are alone, Rourke added. The tactical display updated one final time, showing Coalition ships charging their impossible weapons. 5 minutes to temporal cascade bombardment. 5 minutes to prove that sometimes the galaxy's most dangerous species weren't the ones trying to kill you, but the ones willing to die alongside you. Velthari's 4 hands moved across the control interface, rerouting power from non-essential systems to the defensive grid. Hayes activated communication arrays, coordinating human and hegemony forces with the efficiency born of decades of military experience. Rourke synchronized sensor networks, creating targeting solutions that merged human tactical doctrine with hegemony precision. And as the Coalition fleet prepared to erase Nexthera Prime from history, 2 species that had been at war for 30 years discovered what they could accomplish when they fought on the same side. The first volley of temporal cascade weapons struck the planet's outer defensive shells at exactly 1437 local time. Reality twisted. Space-time buckled and mathematical impossibilities erupted across the alien sky like flowers made of pure physics. The defenses held. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a temporal cascade bombardment failed to achieve its target. The synchronized fire of 5 Coalition species struck defensive systems powered by human ingenuity and hegemony technology, guided by tactical minds that had learned to trust each other in the span of minutes, and held. The Coalition fleet, faced with the impossible sight of their ultimate weapons being turned aside by inferior species working in partnership, did what all bullies do when their victims fight back effectively. They retreated. As enemy ships vanished into hyperspace and the alien sky began to clear, Velthari, Hayes, and Rourke stood in the ruined command center, surrounded by the debris of battle and the lingering energy patterns of weapons that should have killed them all. So, Hayes said after a long moment of silence, what happens now? Velthari looked at the displays showing human ships throughout the system. no longer preparing to sacrifice themselves but instead coordinating with hegemony forces in cleanup operations. Children who had been trained as weapons now working alongside the species that had conquered their homeworld, united by the simple fact that they'd all chosen to survive together. Now, she said, we tried to figure out what peace looks like. It wouldn't be easy. There would be trials, negotiations, the painful process of unwinding 30 years of conquest and oppression. There would be humans who wanted revenge and hegemony officials who saw cooperation as weakness. There would be setbacks, failures, moments when war seemed easier than the hard work of building something better. But as they stood in the ruins of what had once been a perfect symbol of hegemony power, watching human and alien crews work together to repair systems and save lives, they all understood something that would have been impossible to believe just hours earlier. Sometimes the greatest act of defiance isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's saving them. And sometimes when desperate beings with nothing left to lose choose to stand together rather than fall apart, they discover that they were never as weak as they thought and never as alone as they feared. The galaxy had learned to fear one thing above all else: a desperate human with nothing left to lose. But today, for the first time, it had also learned to fear something else. A desperate human who'd found something worth saving, including their enemies. In the end, the greatest victories are not won by those who destroy their enemies, but by those who discover that their enemies were never truly their enemies at all. Only beings trapped in the same impossible circumstances, fighting for the same fundamental right to exist in a galaxy that would rather see them all burn than see them all free. Final entry in the personal log of Commander James Rourke, 1st Human Hegemony Joint Defense Force,